The stage was bathed in a soft glow of polished studio lights, every reflection designed to flatter, every camera angle rehearsed to perfection. It was the kind of environment where celebrities were meant to relax, lean back, and become part of the late-night ritual. Playful banter, carefully timed laughter, a spectacle of entertainment masquerading as intimacy. Millions across America had tuned in for that ritual. They expected charm, they expected wit, they expected Johnny Depp to sit opposite Stephen Colbert and play along with the script. But from the moment Depp entered, there was an unease in the room, a tremor in the air that the audience couldn't name but instinctively felt. He walked not like a guest eager to promote a film, but like a man stepping into contested ground. His movements were deliberate, almost wary, as though each step onto the glossy stage carried the weight of 1,000 headlines, 1,000 judgments, 1,000 rehearsed whispers that had defined him long before this night. Colbert greeted him with the easy warmth of a practiced host, leaning back with a smile designed to charm the cameras as much as his guest. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man who has lived 1,000 lives on screen, Johnny Depp." The crowd erupted in applause, but it was the kind of applause that carried expectation, a demand for performance, for indulgence, for entertainment. Depp lowered himself into the chair, his dark eyes sweeping over the audience, the lights, the man across from him. The opening pleasantries were sharp, dressed as humor, Colbert's words delivered with the precision of a seasoned satirist. Yet beneath the applause and laughter, there was something cutting in his tone, something that leaned too heavily on memory. The scandals, the courtrooms, the endless media circus that had swallowed Depp's private life. Each joke landed with a sting disguised as a smile. Depp did not laugh. His lips curved into a half-smile, polite, restrained, but his eyes did not follow. The cameras caught the stiffness in his jaw, the pause before he answered, the measured weight of a man who knew what was being asked of him. He had been summoned not for conversation, but for judgment disguised as comedy, and he was not willing to play that role. The audience chuckled at Colbert's remarks, though the laughter was uneven, pockets of unease rippling through the studio. Some felt the tension, but dismissed it as nerves. Others sensed they were watching something unscripted begin to unfold. Depp leaned forward, his hands clasped loosely, his posture calm but alert, like a fighter who refuses to telegraph his next move. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and deliberate, carrying not the cadence of an actor performing, but of a man weighing every syllable. "You've had your laugh," he said quietly, and though the words were soft, the air in the studio shifted. The audience stilled. Colbert blinked, his smile flickering for a fraction of a second. And in that instant, millions at home understood. This was not going to be the interview they had expected. This was not light entertainment. This was confrontation, live, on prime-time television. The clash had begun. The applause had hardly faded before the deeper truth of the moment settled in. Johnny Depp had not walked onto that stage as a clean slate. Every step he took toward Colbert's desk had been shadowed by years of controversy, a weight that no applause could wash away. He was, to the public eye, more than just an actor. He was a courtroom witness, a headline, a symbol of a culture divided. Millions remembered the defamation trial that had unfolded like a soap opera, every detail dissected across networks, every gesture transformed into fodder for opinion. Depp knew the price of that exposure. He had lived through the spectacle of strangers debating his life as if it were fiction, journalists twisting his words into weapons, comedians reducing his pain to punchlines. And now, here he was again, seated not in a courtroom, but under the same glare of lights, facing a different kind of judge. The desk, the cameras, the crowd, they formed their own tribunal. And Colbert, sharp-tongued and smiling, had been cast as the man to hold him accountable. The host's voice dripped with charm, but there was a deliberate edge to his questions. "It must feel interesting," Colbert quipped, "to have lived so much of your life on screen and then suddenly find your real life more watched than your movies." The audience laughed politely, though unease lingered. Depp shifted in his chair, his rings catching the light as his fingers flexed once, then stilled. His expression gave nothing away, but his silence was louder than words. Finally, he tilted his head, his voice steady. "Interesting," he repeated softly. That's one word for it. The audience chuckled nervously. Colbert pressed forward, unwilling to let the tension slip away. Well, you have to admit, it was quite the show. The trial, the headlines. People couldn't stop watching. It was meant to be a punchline, a wink to the cameras. But the moment the words left his mouth, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter faltered, thinning into silence. Depp's gaze didn't waver. He leaned back slightly, his tone sharpening with gravity. "A show?" he said, almost incredulous. "For you, maybe. For the press. For everyone who got to sit back and turn it into entertainment." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "But for me, it wasn't a show. It was my life." The words hung heavy in the air, and for a heartbeat, the laughter died completely. The audience felt the weight of it, the reminder that behind the spectacle they had consumed were wounds that had not yet healed. Colbert tried to recover, raising his eyebrows in mock innocence. "Come on, Johnny. It's late-night television. People expect a little fun." Depp, his voice cut through with a firmness that silenced the room. "There's a difference between fun and ridicule, between entertainment and humiliation. You call it comedy, but you weren't the one being dissected in front of the world." The room froze. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their smiles fading. For the first time, the balance of power seemed to tilt. Depp leaned forward now, his posture no longer guarded but confrontational, his tone slow and deliberate. "You sit there," he said, nodding toward Colbert's desk, "protected by your laugh track, your applause, your writers. But when the lights go off, you get to go home untouched. I didn't. I don't. Every joke you make costs me something. Every headline costs me something." The cameras caught Colbert's face as the confidence wavered. His trademark smirk faltered just enough to reveal discomfort. The host tried to laugh it off, but the laughter sounded hollow. And in that moment, the audience realized the truth. This was not the same Johnny Depp they thought they knew, nor was this the Colbert they expected to see. The roles had inverted. The guest was no longer playing along. He was holding the host to account. The shadow of controversy was not Depp's alone. It had stretched across the stage, wrapping itself around the show, around Colbert himself, exposing the cruelty hidden beneath the laughter. What had begun as entertainment was now something far more dangerous. The line between late-night comedy and cultural trial had blurred, and the world was watching. The moment of silence between them lingered, heavy and taut. Colbert, a man accustomed to steering every exchange with effortless wit, shifted in his chair and forced a smile. His audience was waiting for a release, for laughter to return, for the familiar rhythm of late-night television to resume. So he did what he always did when a guest grew serious. He reached for sharper humor, wielding his jokes like weapons wrapped in velvet. "Well," he said lightly, leaning back, "at least you can say you gave the people a performance they'll never forget. I mean, most actors don't get a courtroom debut streamed live to millions. Quite the resume builder, wouldn't you agree?" The crowd chuckled, but it was scattered, uneasy. Depp didn't join them. His lips curved faintly, but the gesture felt more like restraint than amusement. He tapped a finger against the armrest once, twice. The sound picked up faintly by the microphone. Colbert pressed further, sensing the awkwardness and trying to convert it into comedy. "You know, Johnny, for years people watched you play pirates, mad hatters, outlaws. But then suddenly you're in the biggest role of your life, yourself. And let's be honest." He grinned broadly at the audience. Some critics weren't impressed. This time the laughter was louder, sharper, almost relieved. The host's words landed with precision, meant to sting while still leaving him an escape route. The shield of humor. Depp sat unmoving, his eyes fixed on Colbert, the faintest glint of defiance flickering within them. Finally, Depp leaned forward, his voice steady, each word weighed before it left his mouth. "Critics make their living pretending they understand people they've never met. But when it's your life, your family, your truth on the line, it doesn't feel like criticism. It feels like demolition." The words cut through the laughter, and a hush fell over the studio again. Colbert shifted, his pen tapping nervously against the desk before he masked it with another smile. "Come on," he said, keeping his tone light. "You've got to admit, you've been through some colorful times. A lot of material for us late-night folks. We wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't poke at it a little." Depp's voice deepened. "There's a difference between poking fun and poking wounds. When a man is down, is it comedy? Or is it cruelty?" The question hung in the air like a gavel strike. The audience froze, caught between loyalty to their host and sympathy for the man sitting before them. Colbert attempted a quick recovery. "I'd say it's comedy, Johnny. That's the gig. Everyone gets a turn under the spotlight." Depp shook his head slowly, his tone unyielding. "No, not everyone. Only the ones you know won't fight back. Only the ones you think are broken enough to stay silent." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some clapped softly, uncertain but supportive. Others remained still, their laughter now replaced by the weight of witnessing something raw. Colbert forced another laugh, glancing at his audience for reassurance. "Well, you've got to admit, it's not all bad. People still adore you. You're still here, still working, still Johnny Depp." Depp's eyes narrowed, his words precise. "Being adored by strangers doesn't erase being torn apart by the same voices who once praised you. It doesn't erase the headlines, the ridicule, the years it takes to put your life back together while the world treats it like a punchline." The audience's silence was deafening now. Colbert shifted in his seat, his usual rhythm fractured. The desk, the lights, the applause sign above the audience, all the tools of his control seemed to lose power in the face of Depp's refusal to laugh. And then Depp did something unexpected. He smiled, not with humor, but with quiet defiance. "You can make your jokes. That's your role. But don't mistake me for the caricature you've written in your script. I'm not here to play it." The studio felt suddenly smaller, more intimate, as if the cameras had shrunk the space into a courtroom with no escape. Colbert's desk was no longer a shield, but a barrier between himself and a man who would not bend. The audience understood. The comedy had ended. The confrontation had begun. The laughter that usually wrapped itself around Colbert's stage had thinned into an uneasy quiet. The crowd shifted in their seats, sensing they were no longer part of a scripted performance but witnesses to something raw, unpredictable. Colbert leaned forward with a grin that looked more rehearsed than ever, trying to reel the moment back under his control. But Depp's posture told another story. He was no longer the passive guest, no longer the actor who had agreed to smile politely while being reduced to a punchline. Depp leaned into the desk, his rings clinking softly as his hand settled against the polished wood. His eyes were steady, fixed on Colbert with the intensity of a man who had endured enough mockery for one lifetime. His voice, when it came, was calm, so calm it was almost unnerving. "You want me to laugh," he said, his tone deliberate. "You want me to play along. But I'm not here to make your job easier. I'm not here to hand you my scars so you can dress them up as punchlines." The studio went silent, the applause sign overhead glowing red but ignored. Colbert tried to deflect with a chuckle, raising his hands as if to soften the moment. "Johnny, it's just comedy. Nobody here means any harm." Depp tilted his head slightly, his expression carved from steel. "That's the difference between you and me. You think it's harmless because you get to walk away when the cameras stop. I don't." Gasps rippled softly through the audience. Colbert's eyes darted briefly toward the crowd, searching for support, but the faces staring back at him weren't smiling. They were watching, waiting. Depp's voice dropped lower, almost intimate, as though he were speaking not just to Colbert, but to everyone who had ever consumed his pain as entertainment. "I've been in courtrooms where my life was shredded in front of strangers. I've watched headlines twist every word I spoke, and through it all, people like you sat behind desks, smiling, turning it into material. You call it comedy. I call it another trial. The only difference is this one comes with a laugh track." The audience broke into applause, hesitant at first, then stronger. Some clapped nervously, as though unsure whether they were supporting Depp's courage or acknowledging Colbert's stumble. But the tide had shifted. The man in the guest chair was no longer performing, he was prosecuting. Colbert adjusted his tie, forcing a smile that trembled at the edges. All right, he said, his voice a touch tighter now. So you don't want to joke about it. Fair enough. But you've got to understand. This is late-night television. People tune in to see fun, not depositions. Depp's expression didn't waver. Fun at whose expense? You sit there and decide which parts of my life are safe to ridicule. But you never ask what it costs me, or what it says about us, as a culture, when cruelty gets a round of applause. The crowd erupted again, louder this time, clapping and cheering in support. Colbert leaned back, his smile brittle, his control slipping through his fingers. Depp straightened in his seat, his voice resonant now, cutting through the lights and cameras. I didn't come here to play the role you've written for me. I've played enough roles in my life. Tonight, I'll speak for myself. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Colbert's usual arsenal, wit, sarcasm, mockery, had lost its edge. He was no longer the conductor of the spectacle. The audience, sensing the shift, turned their attention fully toward Depp, their energy no longer feeding the host, but the man refusing the script. The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged, alive with the weight of an unspoken truth. The contract had been broken. The rules of late-night comedy had been rewritten, right there, on live television, and Johnny Depp had seized control of the stage. The air inside the studio had shifted. What once buzzed with playful energy now crackled with unease. Rows of faces looked down from the audience risers, caught in the crossfire of a confrontation they hadn't expected. They had come to laugh, to clap on cue, to feel the comfort of being part of a shared performance. But now, laughter felt wrong, applause felt risky, and silence was deafening. Some sat rigid, their hands hovering just above their laps, unsure whether to fold them or clap again. Others leaned forward, eyes darting between Colbert and Depp, as though watching a trial unfold live before them. For the first time, the studio audience wasn't an accessory to the show. They were witnesses, unwillingly drafted into the conflict. Colbert tried to reel them back, raising his eyebrows in exaggerated disbelief. "Look at this," he quipped, forcing a grin. "Johnny Depp giving me a lecture on late-night etiquette. Who knew?" A few laughs burst out, quick, nervous, almost guilty. But they didn't spread. Depp turned his head toward the audience, his gaze steady, his voice firm, but not hostile. "You laugh," he said softly, "because you think it's just a game. But when you go home tonight, you'll forget the punchlines. I don't get to forget. I live with them." A hush fell over the risers. The words weren't delivered as performance, but as testimony, and it showed. Depp's tone wasn't pleading. It was factual, unflinching. He wasn't begging for sympathy. He was indicting the ritual they had come to participate in. One woman in the front row folded her arms across her chest, her face tense. A man a few seats away clapped once, then stopped, unsure if the gesture was appropriate. The audience was fracturing, half instinctively loyal to the host who had guided them through countless nights of laughter, half drawn toward the wounded dignity of the guest who now spoke with the cadence of truth. Colbert, sensing control slipping further, leaned on sarcasm. "Johnny, you make it sound like we're running a tribunal here. It's comedy. It's supposed to be harmless fun." Depp's gaze didn't leave the crowd, his voice sharpened. "Fun is when everyone laughs. But look around. Does this look like fun to you?" The cameras swept the audience for reaction, capturing faces that looked uneasy, conflicted, caught in the uncomfortable realization that they were no longer a laugh track, but a jury box. The silence stretched, until a man near the back shouted, "Let him speak!" Applause followed, scattered but real. Colbert's eyes flicked toward the interruption, his grip tightening around his pen. For the first time, the rhythm of his own audience had turned against him. Depp leaned back now, his tone softening. "I'm not asking for pity. I don't need that. What I'm asking is simple. When you laugh at someone's destruction, when you treat their life as entertainment, ask yourself, what does that make you? What does it make all of us?" The words landed with the force of a closing argument. A pocket of the crowd clapped again, louder this time, their energy spreading through the risers. Others followed, hesitant but compelled, the sound building until it drowned out the silence. Colbert forced a smile, trying to ride the wave. "Well, "It looks like they've made up their minds," he said, chuckling, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Depp didn't respond. He let the applause speak for itself, his expression calm, his posture steady. The audience had chosen sides, and though not unanimous, the shift was undeniable. They were no longer passive participants. They were witnesses, caught in the glare of a confrontation that demanded they look inward. And as the clapping died down, one thing became clear. Johnny Depp had turned the crowd from accessories to jurors, and the verdict was beginning to favor him. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the shift in atmosphere like a storm front sweeping across a quiet sky. What began as a lively conversation between two men of stature was now unraveling into something far more raw, far more dangerous. Stephen Colbert leaned forward in his chair, the corners of his smile tightening as though he were testing how far he could push. "Johnny," he said, tone edged with that particular brand of wit designed to amuse the crowd, "you've lived through chaos of your own making. Do you ever think, just maybe, that some of your wounds were self-inflicted?" A hush rippled through the studio audience. What had been laughter seconds before now turned into nervous shifting in seats. Johnny Depp's gaze darkened, his features tightening, the weight of past battles pressing visibly on his shoulders. He inhaled slowly, fingers tapping against the armrest, each second stretching longer than it should. His voice, when it came, was low but piercing. "Stephen, there's a difference between a man making mistakes and a man being hunted. What I lived through wasn't chaos I built. It was chaos built for me." The words hit with the resonance of something more than a rebuttal. They carried history, scars, and the kind of truth that doesn't need permission to be spoken. The audience's silence deepened, waiting to see how Colbert would handle it. Colbert's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, though he tried to cover it with a chuckle. "Well, you've certainly got a unique perspective." Depp leaned forward, breaking the invisible barrier of politeness that had framed the exchange until now. His eyes locked onto Colbert's, steady, unblinking. "Perspective? No, Stephen. Perspective is what comedians use to keep the world laughing. What I've got is survival. What I've got is the truth of how quickly people you thought you knew will sell you out for applause." The remarque cut into the studio air like glass breaking. Some audience members gasped, others glanced around, unsure whether to clap or stay frozen. Colbert shifted in his seat, the weight of the moment pulling at him. He attempted to steer the conversation back to lighter waters, but Depp wasn't finished. "You think it's clever to throw my pain into a punchline," Depp said, his voice sharpening now. "But there's a line between wit and cruelty, and I won't let you, or anyone, decide that my life is a late-night joke." The tension in the studio reached its peak. Cameras framed the two men like duelists, their words weapons, their silence just as dangerous. Colbert opened his mouth, then closed it again, realizing any quip would fall flat against the gravity of Depp's words. And in that silence, the power shifted. Depp, once framed as the guest under scrutiny, now commanded the stage. The audience, sensing the tide turn, erupted, not in laughter, but in applause, deep and resounding, a wave of approval for a man who had refused to be diminished. Colbert leaned back, swallowing his pride with a practiced smile, but his eyes betrayed him. For the first time, he wasn't the one holding the narrative in his hands. Depp simply nodded, his expression unreadable, but the message was clear. He would not be mocked into submission. The exchange had started as a game of wit, but ended as a reckoning, the air still charged, the applause lingering like thunder after lightning. The studio air grew dense, as if every breath had become heavier with the weight of tension. The earlier clash between Johnny Depp and Stephen Colbert had left an aftertaste that lingered, bitter and unresolved. Cameras continued to roll, though the atmosphere carried the hush of something unscripted, something raw. The crowd shifted uneasily in their seats, the lines between entertainment and confrontation blurring more with every passing second. Colbert straightened his cue cards, his smile tightened like a man trying to reassert control over a ship battered by a storm. "Well," he said with a forced chuckle, "that